It feels like you can't even turn on the news these days without hearing about another data privacy fine. Some company getting slapped with a huge penalty for, not handling our information quite right. It's a lot to keep up with,
It really is.
especially if you're in the business world and using these CRM systems, which, well, let's face it, pretty much everyone is at this point.
True.
So we're diving deep today into CRM systems and specifically how they intersect with data privacy. We've got a whole stack of articles here to help us untangle it all.
A lot of great information out there. Some of it pretty dense, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's kind of our mission here, right? To sift through it all and pull out those golden nuggets, the stuff you really need to know.
Exactly. And the articles we've got really offer a balanced view, too. It's not all doom and gloom about the risks, but also some exciting opportunities.
I did notice that. And speaking of doom and gloom, one thing that really caught my eye was just the sheer size of those fines, those GDPR and CCPA violations. We're
Yeah.
talking millions, billions even.
Yeah, those definitely grab your attention. Meta, for example,
Wow.
they got hit with a 1.2 billion euro fine this year. Makes you think twice.
Makes you think more than twice.
It does. It shows that regulators are serious about enforcing these privacy laws, and that's a good thing. It's not just about the fines themselves, but about protecting people's data, their rights.
Absolutely.
Like that right to be forgotten in GDPR, for example. Individuals can ask to have their data completely wiped, their entire history with a company gone.
Wow. So that means a CRM system, can't just have a manual process for that. It needs to be built right in, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's got to be part of the system's DNA, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just deletion, too. Individuals also have the right to see their data, correct any errors, even restrict how it's used. All that needs to be handled smoothly by the CRM.
That's a tall order.
It is.
Now, I'm fairly familiar with the basics of GDPR and CCPA, but just for our listeners who maybe aren't, can you give a quick rundown of what those are and, what the key differences are?
Sure. GDPR, that's the General Data Protection Regulation. It comes from Europe, and it applies to any company handling data from individuals in the EU, no matter where that company is actually based. CCPA is the California Consumer Privacy Act, and that one, as the name suggests, focuses on protecting residents of California. But the overall goal is similar. They both aim to give people more control over their personal information. CCTA, though, is really strong on giving consumers the right to know what data a company has on them and what they're using it for.
So compliance isn't one size fits all. You have to tailor your approach based on where your customers are and what laws apply to them.
Precisely. And a good CRM system, believe it or not, can actually be a big help here. If it has the right features and processes in place, it can actually turn this whole compliance challenge into a competitive advantage.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
Yeah.
Let's talk features. What are some of the things companies should be looking for in a CRM from a data privacy standpoint?
Well, first and foremost, you need data encryption. You're talking about a system that's holding a treasure trove of customer information, names, addresses, purchase history, even things like payment details. So you've got to make sure all that data is protected both in transit and when it's just sitting there in the system.
So it's not just about having any old encryption. It has to be, the good stuff.
Right. You want to see things like AES 256 encryption. That's a strong one. It basically scrambles the data so that nobody can read it without the key to unlock it. A really vital layer of protection against unauthorized access and, those dreaded data breaches.
Makes sense. Encryption, check. What else?
Access controls, that's another big one. You don't want just anyone in your company to have free reign over all that customer data. A good CRM lets you set very specific permissions. So, only the sales team can access sales data, marketing gets the marketing data, and so on.
Yeah, keeps things nice and tidy and hopefully more secure.
Exactly. It minimizes the risk of data being used improperly or, accidentally getting into the wrong hands. And from a compliance standpoint, it also shows regulators that you're taking data privacy seriously.
Good point. Okay,
Right.
so encryption, check. Access controls, check. Anything else on the data privacy must-have list?
You've also got to think about regular privacy audits. Think of it like a health checkup for your system and your whole data privacy approach.
Interesting. But wouldn't it be better to have someone from the outside, an independent party, do those audits to avoid any, well, bias.
That's a great point. It's definitely helpful to have an objective outsider come in. They can often spot things you might miss.
A fresh perspective.
Exactly. And these audits, that shouldn't be a one-time thing either. Data privacy regulations, they're always changing. You need to keep pace. So, quarterly audits, annually, something like that. It's got to be a regular thing.
So it's a continuous process of watching, evaluating, making adjustments as needed, not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Exactly. You need to be constantly on top of your practices, adapting to the latest rules, and always looking for ways to improve.
I have to say, this is a lot to digest.
Yeah.
It sounds like building a solid data privacy strategy around your CRM is, well, it's a pretty big job.
It can be, yeah. But remember, it's not just about checking boxes and trying to avoid getting fined. It's really about building trust with your customers.
Good point. And speaking of customers, I'm curious about how all this emphasis on data privacy, how is that affecting the actual customer experience?
It can seem that way, yeah. I mean, you hear data privacy, you think about all these restrictions, all this complexity. But customers today, they're really savvy. They understand how their data is being used, or at least they want to. They're looking for companies that are transparent, that give them control. And when companies actually do that, that builds a level of trust that's, honestly, it's priceless.
So it's not about just locking down the data and, being stingy with it. It's about respecting the customer and the choices that they want to make.
Exactly. Think about it. How do you feel when, you get bombarded with these ads that are completely irrelevant, or when you feel like a company's being shady with your data? I mean, doesn't that just erode your trust?
100%. It makes you wonder, do I even want to do business with these people?
Right. But what if a company's upfront with you, tells you exactly what they're doing, lets you choose what you share, maybe even gives you tools to manage your own data?
That would make a huge difference, at least for me. I'd feel like, okay, they actually respect me as a customer. They get it.
Exactly. And that
Yeah.
respect, that translates into loyalty, People are more likely to stick around, more likely to tell their friends about you. And that, of course, is good for business. Everyone wins.
I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But let's get down to brass tacks.
Mhm.
Do you have any examples of companies that are doing this well, that are turning data privacy into like a genuinely positive experience for their customers?
Oh, absolutely. There are some companies out there, they're giving customers granular control over their data. You can pick and choose what you share, how it's used. You can even ask for it to be deleted. Others are being super transparent about personalization. You know how you get those recommendations that are sometimes, well, a little creepy? These companies are explaining exactly how that works, but in a way that doesn't feel intrusive.
So it's like, instead of feeling like my data is being used against me,
Hmm.
I feel like it's being used to actually improve my experience, make things better.
That's the idea. And some are even experimenting with things like data dividends or reward programs where you get something tangible for sharing your data. It's a whole different way of thinking about it. Like, instead of data being something companies extract from us, it becomes something we collaborate on.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Kind of shifts the balance of power, right?
It does. It's being driven by these new regulations, but also by just how customers feel about their data. It's a big shift.
So we've talked about the upside, but I can imagine there are challenges too, right? Like, how do you actually put this into practice?
Yeah.
What are some of the hurdles that businesses face when they're trying to do this data privacy thing right?
One of the biggest ones, I think, is finding that sweet spot between personalization and privacy. Customers want those personalized experiences, they've gotten used to it, but they don't want to feel like they're constantly being tracked. So it's a delicate dance for companies figuring out how to use the data to make things better without going too far, without being creepy.
It's like walking a tightrope, right?
Exactly. And then there's just the sheer complexity of it all. You've got all these regulations, they're different everywhere, and they're always evolving. Plus, you have technology that's changing so fast, and customer expectations, they're in flux too. It's a lot to keep up with.
So it's not something you can just, figure out on the fly.
Uh.
It takes some real expertise.
It does, and resources too. Not every company has a team of data privacy experts on staff. That's why it's so important for the CRM providers themselves to step up and, make this stuff easier to manage.
You mean by building those privacy features right into their platforms?
Yes, exactly. Things like consent management tools, ways to anonymize data, even analytics that are built with privacy in mind, that can make a big difference, especially for smaller businesses that don't have those big in-house teams.
Makes sense. But even with the best technology, even if you have all the bells and whistles, it seems like so much of this comes down to company culture, doesn't it?
100%. I mean, technology is a tool, right? But it's the people that make the difference. If a company doesn't actually value data privacy, if it's not part of their DNA, then no amount of tech is going to fix that. You need leadership that gets it. You need employees who are trained to handle data the right way. It's got to be a top-down approach.
So it's that holistic approach again.
Mm.
People, processes, and technology all working together.
Exactly. And when you get all that right, it's not just about avoiding risk and, those big fines. It's about building a business that's trustworthy, that's sustainable.
Right.
That's a powerful thing.
That's a great point. Now, before we jump into the future of data privacy, and I am really excited to get into that, I want to touch on something we haven't really talked about directly yet: security.
Of course, yeah.
We've discussed encryption, access controls, all that. But what about the bigger picture?
Yeah.
Like, how do you protect CRM data from those big, scary data breaches, those cyber attacks you hear about?
It's a never-ending battle, to be honest. The bad guys are always coming up with new tricks, so you have to be vigilant. You need things like multi-factor authentication, you have to be doing regular checks for vulnerabilities, and you absolutely need a plan in place for if or when something does happen, you have to be ready to respond.
And it's not just about outside threats, right? Sometimes those data leaks come from inside, whether it's accidental or, someone with bad intentions.
Unfortunately, yeah. That's why employee training is so crucial. Everyone in the company, from the top down, needs to understand how important data security is and what their role is in protecting that information.
So again, it comes back to that culture of data privacy. It's not just an IT problem, it's everyone's responsibility.
Exactly. Which leads to a really interesting question, actually. How are all these trends, this focus on the customer, the regulations that keep changing, the new tech that's emerging, how is all that going to shape the future of data privacy? It's a big topic, one that deserves its own, deep dive.
It does indeed. And that's exactly what we're going to do after, well, right now. So, we've talked about the nitty-gritty of CRM data privacy, all those features, and even how it can actually lead to better relationships with your customers. Now I think it's time to, look ahead a bit, put on our futurist hats.
I'm game.
Oh.
Always up for a little crystal ball gazing. What do you see on the horizon for data privacy? What's coming next?
Well, one thing that keeps popping up in these articles is this idea that, data privacy isn't just a compliance thing anymore. It's becoming like a core value for society.
It's interesting, right? I mean, for years, it was kind of this niche topic that only the lawyers really cared about.
Right. Like tucked away in some back office.
Exactly. And now it's everywhere. It's front page news. It's a political issue. People are talking about it.
Yeah. It's at the dinner table.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to lead to some pretty big changes in the way things are regulated. GDPR and CCPA, they might just be the tip of the iceberg.
You think so?
I wouldn't be surprised to see a whole wave of new privacy laws popping up all over the world. Some experts are even predicting, a global data privacy standard. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it's interesting to think about.
A global standard. Wow. That would be a game changer.
It would. One set of rules for everybody. Imagine that. It would definitely make things easier for businesses, but getting every country to agree on something like that, well, it's a tall order. There are just so many different perspectives on this stuff, different cultures, different political systems.
True. But even if we don't get a global standard, I do think we'll see more, regional blocks kind of aligning their regulations like we're already seeing in Europe and North America.
Yeah, I think that's very likely. And that's going to put even more pressure on companies to bake privacy into everything they do right from the start. You can't just tack it on as an afterthought.
Privacy by design, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got new regulations on the horizon. What about technology? How do you see tech playing into the future of data privacy?
That's where things get really interesting. I mean, we're already seeing some amazing advancements in these privacy-enhancing technologies, or PETs, as they're sometimes called. These are basically tools and techniques that are designed to protect individual privacy, while still, allowing us to do all the cool things we can do with data.
Okay, PETs, I like it. What are some examples of these PETs?
Well, one that's getting a lot of buzz is homomorphic encryption. It sounds super complicated, but basically it lets you perform calculations on data that's still encrypted. So you can get insights, do analysis, without ever actually seeing the raw data itself.
So I can, study sensitive information without actually seeing it?
That's the idea. Sounds like science fiction, right?
It kind of does.
But it's becoming a reality. And it has huge implications for, fields like healthcare, finance, research, all these places where privacy is absolutely critical. Then there's differential privacy, which is another fascinating one.
Differential privacy. I've heard that term, but Remind me how that one works.
So imagine you're working with a data set and you want to protect people's identities. Differential privacy adds a bit of noise, a bit of randomness to the data. That way, you can still see the overall trends, you can get the big picture, but you can't identify any individuals.
So I could study, like, disease patterns or social behavior without putting anyone's personal information at risk.
It's exact.
That's really cool. These PETs sound like they could, you know, completely change the game when it comes to data privacy.
Mhm.
But are they, like, ready for prime time? Are companies actually using them now?
Some are further along than others, but yeah, companies are definitely experimenting. Some CRM systems, for example, are starting to use differential privacy in their analytics dashboards.
Hmm.
So you can see how customers are behaving as a group, but you're not seeing the individual data points.
Interesting. So I can get those insights without, peeking into anyone's personal file.
Right. And that's just the beginning. I think we're going to see a ton of innovation in this area, as these technologies get better and easier to use.
It's exciting, but I also have to wonder, are there any downsides? I mean, any technology, especially one this powerful, can be used for, well, not so good things.
That's a valid concern. We have to be careful, right? We need to be having these conversations about the ethics of it all, making sure these technologies are being used responsibly and that they benefit everyone, not just a select few.
It's not just about the tech itself. It's about the people behind it, the choices they make.
Absolutely. We need to create a culture where ethical data use is just, it's baked into everything we do right from the start.
So, okay, we've got these new regulations, these cool technologies, and this growing awareness that data privacy is, well, it's a big deal. What does it all mean for the average person, though? How will this impact our lives, in a real concrete way?
One of the most exciting things I see happening is, this idea of individuals actually owning and controlling their data.
You mean like we get to decide how our data is used and maybe even, make some money off of it?
Yeah, exactly. We're starting to see the early stages of this with things like data marketplaces, where you can actually sell your data to companies or license it to them. It puts the power back in the hands of the individual.
So instead of feeling like, my data is just being taken from me, I actually have some control.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
There are still kinks to work out, of course. We need to make sure these marketplaces are fair, transparent, secure, but it's a really interesting idea.
It is. I'm also intrigued by this whole data trust concept that keeps coming up. Can you, explain that in a nutshell?
So imagine there's this legal entity, a data trust, that holds and manages data on behalf of a group of people, or maybe a group of organizations. They basically act as this neutral third party, making sure the data is being used ethically, responsibly, and that it aligns with what the people who own that data actually want.
So it's like having like a guardian for your data.
Yeah, exactly. Someone you trust to look after your interests. It's still early days for this, but I think data trusts have a lot of potential. They could really change the way we think about governing and sharing data.
Wow. So much to think about. We've gone from compliance to data marketplaces to data trusts all in one conversation.
It's a wild world out there. But I think it shows just how important data privacy has become. It's not a niche topic anymore. It's something that's shaping technology, business, society, everything.
Well, if there's one takeaway from today's deep dive, it's that data privacy isn't just an IT issue or a legal issue. It's an everyone issue. It touches every part of our lives, and it's only going to become more important as we move forward.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's something we need to keep talking about, keep thinking about, keep engaging with.
Absolutely. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me for this incredible exploration of CRM systems and data privacy. It's been a fascinating journey.
The pleasure was all mine. Always a great conversation.
And to all of our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought, maybe even sparked some new ideas.
Remember, the future of data privacy isn't something that's just happening to us. It's something we're all creating together.
So let's make it a future where privacy and innovation can go hand in hand. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay in control of your data.
Thanks, everyone.
See you on our next deep dive.